everybody, and welcome to another Top 5 board gaming video. Today I'm going to be talking about something similar to what I've talked about in the past. Today I'm going to be talking about upgrades. Now this is a little bit different. Previously I did a video about my top 5 favorite expansions of all time. What this is rather is a complete revamping of the entirety of the game. How it works, how it functions. You've got, second edition, third edition, etc., etc. Whether it's because a new company bought the rights or because the same company really wants to sort of recapitalize on something that it's running out on, or whatever it happens to be. That's what I'm going to be talking about today. And mostly I'm going to be doing this in the context of adding additional things. So there's a lot of examples of this that really didn't do a great deal. So just some games that I'm going to mention very briefly but not talk about in depth. For example, Gravwell and Pandemic, those are really good examples of games that got updated to a second edition, but nothing really added to them except aesthetic changes. Another big thing is Munchkin, and although that did get an upgrade, it got the board so that you can move the little guys around and all that kind of stuff. The thing is with Munchkin, it's just so ridiculously big as it is, then can you really say it's a new addition? It's just another Munchkin. It's Munchkin like 10.65 essentially is the one that has the board. The other one that I wanted to mention very briefly was actually King of New York. Because King of Tokyo, which came before it, was, a good game. It's a good, solid game, but then King of New York really revamped everything up. And that's really sort of the kind of caveat game that I'll be talking about, which is the games that, while they weren't directly updated or upgraded, they have a sort of spiritual successor. And King of Tokyo is an example of a game that has that spiritual successor in King of New York. But with that, I hope that you enjoy this video. As always, please put any and all feedback in the comments below. You guys know I'd love to hear from you. Whatever games that you enjoy that got massive updates or upgrades, whatever it happens to be, please let me know. But for now, I'll go ahead and get right into my number 5. At number 5, I've got a game that I have talked about in numerous different ways, and particularly actually in this very context, where I talk about the previous edition and how I greatly enjoy the newer edition more so. The game itself is Thunderstone. And incidentally, this is actually one of the few games on this list for which I have both editions that I'm talking about. So Thunderstone is the original game, where Thunderstone Advance is the new updated version. And this is another example of, it's not necessarily a spiritual successor in the strictest sense of the word, because, it's Thunderstone bigger, essentially, is what the titles are. But the thing is, I really do prefer Thunderstone Advance. I've talked about it many, many times. I love the fact that it's got built-in solitary rules. I love the fact that it's got the board that allows you to organize all the cards a lot easier. And the other thing is that, as of now, of course, Thunderstone Advance has way more expansions. It's got a lot more options compared to the original Thunderstone. Now, don't get me wrong, the original Thunderstone, not bad at all, but if given the opportunity, I would definitely prefer to play Thunderstone Advance. And incidentally, this is one of the examples that I had on my top 5 better games to play. I actually said, you could play Thunderstone, or you could play Thunderstone Advance instead. So essentially, just go watch that video and you've got all my reasoning there. Essentially the same this time around. But the reason that this is number 5 on the list is essentially because this was really designed to replace Thunderstone. At least that's what it seems to me. That was the whole point, but at the same time, you had such a drastic change that Thunderstone Advance really could have been a new IP. It could have been a completely different property. And not only that, but obviously the basal mechanics, the base set, the cards, the board, all of that kind of stuff really could have been applied to pretty much anything. But very exciting. So another good example is Legendary. We've got Legendary, and then we've got Legendary Villains, which can be combined with the original Legendary, but not necessarily. You can also play Villains mostly on its own, and on top of that, you got a ton of expansions for Legendary. Great game, a lot of fun, but it's maybe not necessarily a direct upgrade. And I know, again, Thunderstone by itself, still a great game without a doubt. But either way, overall, Thunderstone into Thunderstone Advance, my number 5. As I mentioned, Thunderstone is one of the very few games on this list that I actually own both the original and the updated version of. But for this next one that I'm going to be talking about, it's actually really interesting because in part this came out to really help out players, but it also came out as sort of promotional material for something that's coming up in just a little while. The game itself is the X-Wings miniatures game. Relatively recently, the new version of this base set, which is Force and Destiny, or the Force Unleashed, sorry, Force and Destiny is the RPG. But the Force Unleashed is the new edition of the X-Wings miniatures base game. And the reason that I really like the Force, is it Force Unleashed? See, now I don't even remember. Force Awakens! That's what it is. Yeah. See, I'm getting all my games all confused. The Force Awakens edition of the X-Wings miniature set is actually really neat. It's got a couple of cool little things. First off, the aesthetics are different, which, you know, you can either take or leave. But the aesthetics are really cool. You get some cool blues in there, which is always nice to see. But more importantly is the mechanical changes. You've got a lot of changes to the different cards that you can play, how you can play them, when you can play them, what you can do, all that kind of stuff. And that's really the biggest aspect of the changes, is that you have that you get a lot more strategic value out of some of the cards, which is really neat. And in addition, if any of you enjoy playing this game and you like playing at your friendly local game store, or if you're playing tournaments or anything like that, you're actually not allowed to use this set anymore. You have to use the Force Awakens set because, you know, they're just trying to standardize everything, which is fine. You know, it makes sense, and my instructions fell down here. Go back up, instructions. Nobody wants to see you. We want to see the X-Wing and the TIE Fighters, right? But yeah, you're not actually allowed to use this anymore because it doesn't have the updated cards and things like that. This is in contrast to something like Pandemic, which I mentioned earlier, where I've got the first edition of the Pandemic, but because I got the expansions, I actually had to get the updated cards. So, you know, you can't really do that with this. You might as well just get the whole new set. It's not super expensive, but either way, the Force Awakens new set for the X-Wings miniatures game is my number 4. At number 3, I've got a game that is absolutely nothing except crazy, awesome, chaotic fun. It is Cashin Guns. Now, Cashin Guns, about a year ago-ish, a little bit more than a year ago, came out with the Cashin Guns 2nd edition. Now, that added a lot of really, really interesting pieces. You've got things like you can take gems as opposed to just money. You can take paintings. You've got different character archetypes. You've got different capabilities. All sorts of cool stuff. It really added a lot to the game. Now, again, just like everything on this list, don't get me wrong, the original game is fun. It's a good game. I've talked about it. I've sung its praises in numerous different contexts. But if given a chance, the 2nd edition is actually really, really cool. For one thing, you can actually play, out of the box, you can play with 8 people as opposed to just 6 with the original one, which, you know, just gives you a lot more versatility in that context. The guns themselves actually look a little bit cooler, whereas these are all orange. The ones from the 2nd edition are black with the orange tips. You know, all that kind of the stupid little stuff that you never really think about, and you're just like, oh, that's kind of cool. But really the biggest thing is the way that the loot and the characters work, which is also known as the entirety of the game. That has been massively updated for the 2nd edition, and I personally really enjoy it. But again, I just haven't picked it up, mostly because I barely even play this anymore, much less being able to play the 2nd edition. So I just haven't been able to bring myself to buy it. But either way, the 2nd edition Cashin Guns, absolutely amazing, a ton of fun. If you're gonna get it, if you don't have the original already, then go out and get it. It's pretty awesome. It's a lot of fun. So with that, Cashin Guns, the 2nd edition is my number 3. I've got a game that is the only one on this list that is backwards. That's right, this is the only game where a previous edition, in my opinion, is better than the new edition. Now, if you guys have seen my videos before, if you, especially some of my more recent ones, or even my not so recent ones, then you know what game I'm talking about. It is Acquire. That's right, Acquire, the game of tile placement and stocks and bonds and trades and finance and money and all that good stuff. The Avalon Hill version, the one that came before this one, this is the Wizards of the Coast version. The Avalon Hill version is vastly superior to this one. Now, there's a couple of things that this one does have. It is much smaller, which is kind of nice if you're worried about storage space, transport, all that kind of stuff. But the thing is that with the Avalon Hill version, you've got the actual physical, nice, like, tent tiles that actually fit over the board and don't move. Oh, it's so frustrating playing this version of the game just because of that. And again, that is really the majority of the context in which I've talked about this game. I talked about it in my Board Games Dislikes video, is the first one that comes to mind, where it's something that I don't like. I don't like the fact that if you bump the table, you can basically ruin the entire game and everything is just like and shifts around all over the place. So the original version, well, not the original version, but I don't know if it was the one right before this, but either way, Avalon Hill version, the one that actually has the little plastic tent tiles, so much better. The thing is that this one really didn't add anything to the game. It's essentially a reprint of it, but the reason that this is so high on the list is because it's such a drastic difference between the two versions, and it really does greatly affect the gameplay and the experience that you as a player can have. But either way, Acquire, particularly the Avalon Hill version, is my number 2. At number 1, I've got a game that I have talked about in this context a few times, and it's also the second and the only other game on this list where I have multiple versions of the game that I wanted to talk about. The game itself is Cosmic Encounter. Now, this particular one is the Avalon Hill version of Cosmic Encounter, which I don't believe I've really shown you guys before. The one that you guys are used to seeing, from me at least, is this one, the Fantasy Flight Edition. And this one is actually my favorite version. I really do prefer it. The thing is that Cosmic Encounter is really interesting. It started back, I want to say, in the mid-60s, if I'm not mistaken. It might be the early 70s. Don't quote me on that. But it started a very long time ago, and it had many different iterations. One of my other personal favorites was the Mayfair edition. There were somewhere around like 8 expansions, I want to say. It was absolutely ridiculous. A ton of pretty useless stuff like the moons and things like that. Never really liked playing with the moons, but it was absolutely ludicrous. And that was where you had, you know, you could have a stack of alien powers like this big. It was ridiculous. Absolutely huge. Although now with 5 expansions, the Fantasy Flight Cosmic Encounter is no slouch in that sense. The thing is that the reason this is the top on my list is partially because this is my favorite game, without a doubt. But also the Avalon Hill version, while it does a good bit to like try really hard, the problem is I feel like it's trying too hard. Part of the problem is that the way the board is designed is really dumb. I don't like it at all. One of the things is that the warp, the thing in the middle, you actually have these cardboard pieces that fit into the warp, so everybody is literally just surrounding the warp, and it just makes for like awkwardly trying to reach across the table and stuff like that. I hate doing it. I always just say, everybody just take your planets and put them in front of you. It's not that complicated. The other thing is that in this version, you have far fewer options with regard to the number of what was I going to say? The number of alien powers that you can have. Again, if it had been expanded, certainly you could have had more, but I think there's only like 15 or 20 in this. It's very, very few. I mean, it's almost pitiful in this sense. The other nice thing with the Fantasy Flight is with just the base set, you can play with up to 5 people. Avalon Hill is only 4. You know, you can potentially just take that or leave that, really just dependent on your particular tastes. But either way, I personally really enjoy the Fantasy Flight one more. I like its versatility a lot more. I like the fact that you start off with a lot more alien powers. You have a lot more intrigue with regard to the types of powers, whether, you know, you've got the loser, for example, where the loser wins and the winner loses, etc., etc. I believe that Avalon Hill has that. I'm not certain, though. But it really is somewhat unfortunate. Let me see here. 20 alien cards. 20 alien cards in this. That's it. It's just not that great. But like I said, reason that this is top on the list, first off, it's my favorite game. Second off, so very many different editions, most of which really did increase and up the ante on it. But for my purposes and for the purpose of this room, the Fantasy Flight one is the one that I always reach for. But that's it. For my number 1, Cosmic Encounter, my personal favorite edition update game. So that's it for me, folks. I hope that you enjoyed this video on games that got some sort of edition update in one form or another. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of this video, there are a ton of different games that did this that probably potentially deserve to be on this list. Again, King of Tokyo getting updated to King of New York, well, updated quote-unquote. Munchkin getting the nice little board so you can actually keep track of your level, which is tremendously helpful. Even Game of Thrones getting the relatively recent 2nd edition. You know, all of those kinds of things. You know, do you prefer games that just give you aesthetic changes? Do you really want to have mechanical updates and all that kind of stuff? What do you think? I love to hear from you guys. Please leave any and all feedback in the comments below. Just tell me what you think about my own list. Tell me if I'm crazy or if you like them, whatever it happens to be. Do you think I need to get all of the editions of all these games? Because I know I kind of want to. But with that, thank you so very much for being here, and I will see you next time.